Good morning.
Good morning.
How are y'all been?
Good.
I've missed you. Thank you for doing Let It Be, Mary Lynn and Randy. It took me back to my older brother, Gilbert Jr. His nickname was Junie. We called him Junebug. He passed away about seven years ago, had a really challenging time with addiction, and he would play the piano that our parents had rented for us, and we would sit and we'd bang out every Beatles song that we possibly knew. And so when I finally had a chance to go visit his gravesite down in Hobbs, that's what I sang for him, and so that took me back. So thank you. Wow. Boy, some great speakers this month, huh? 3 Bonnies? Must be something special about Bonnie. This month we've been looking at the continuity of life, the continuation, the idea of immortality. And I started to think about it, and I realized that I have some good news for you and I have some bad news for you. The good news is you're all going to die. And the bad news is you're all going to die, and so me included, and that's wonderful. So we're looking at it from the sense of new thought, and we looked at what the Fillmores had to say about it, what Ernest Holmes had to say about it. My own ancestry is from the Yucatan area. They were the Mayans, some of them were the Aztecs, we're not really certain, but they created entire belief systems based around the afterlife or the life after, that's what they called it, and they would prepare elaborate rituals, and they would have all of these ceremonies, which is where the Dia de los Muertos came out with the marigolds, and then the bread with the pan muertos, as we call them. But they also had this thing called the Aztec death whistle. I bet you've never heard. It's shaped like a little skull, and this is my neck one, my smaller one. Now, we're not sure exactly what they used it for, but some people speculate that there would be like 800 of them that were going to go meet the opposing tribe in battle in the middle of the night in a dark jungle, and they would all be wearing this black face paint. And so here comes that other tribe. We're going to kick some Aztec butt. And they're coming up there, and they hear this times 800. Would you run? I would. Maybe they use this as a tool to send the spirit on to this next realm. Maybe they used it in war rituals. We're not really certain. But when I started to think about what my Toltec ancestors would think about death, and one of the best Toltec writers and teachers who's out there is Don Miguel Ruiz, and he has some beautiful words to say that I'm going to get to later. But first, I do want to tell you one of the stories about how death came to be to the world. Many years ago, there were only 2 people on the entire world. They were called Old Man and Old Woman. They were trying to decide, how should we make this world be? Let's come to some sort of agreement of how people should live and how the plants and animals are going to be treated. Well, Old Man says, I should have first say in everything. Old Woman says, I agree with you. That is, of course, if I have second say in everything. So the old man began to make his plans, and he says, women will have the job of tanning the hides. They will take the brains out of the animal and tan the hides, and it should be very, very easy. They'll spread it on, and it'll be tanned. Old woman says, no. It needs to be hard. It needs to be a process. They need to be able to rub the brains on the tan. They need to be able to scrape it and to dry it and to treat it and to cure it. The old man kind of looks at her like, okay. And she says, this way, then we'll know who the most valuable workers of the people are. Okay, he says. Well, I'll tell you what. Let's give them 10 fingers on each hand. And then that way they'll be able to accomplish a lot of tasks. Old woman says, no. Let's give them 4 fingers and 1 thumb. 10 would be too many, and it would just get in the way. This was before texting, of course. So old man said, all right, let's give them eyes and a nose and a mouth, and let's put it all in one straight line, up and down on their face. A woman says, what are you talking about? No. Let's put them 2 eyes crossways so they can see both sides coming. And let's give them a mouth below their nose so they can smell their food. He says, all right, well, what are we going to do about how long are they going to live? And so old man says, I'll tell you what, let's throw a buffalo chip in the water. If the buffalo chip, if it floats, then people will die 4 days and come back. If it sinks, they'll die forever. So he threw the buffalo chip in the water. Of course, it floated, right? And so she says, I told you that wouldn't work. She says, no, because buffalo chips always float. Let's throw a rock in and see if it floats. And so if the rock, if it floats, then people get to come back every 4 days. If it sinks, they're going to die forever. So she threw a rock in the water, and bloop, it just sank right away. So he said, okay, people will now die forever. So years go on, and they're enjoying their life on the earth, communing with the animals, naming all the different plants in the mountains. And soon old woman has a daughter, and she gets sick and she dies. And she doesn't come back. So old woman goes to old man and says, hey, you know that thing we talked about? I'd like to try it one more time and see if we can get them to come back. He says, no, what's done is done. And so even to this day, that's why when people die, we stay dead. Clearly, death is not something we are comfortable talking about, nor something that we really understand what happens. Truly, nobody here that is alive on this planet, all 7 billion of us, really knows what's going to happen when we make that transition, when we go over that crossing. But there is a Native American way of talking about it, and it's called walking on. So whenever somebody from the tribe dies, they say that that person has walked on, that their spirit has now walked on. What that implies is a continuation of the journey rather than just a linear end. So the rituals and the ceremony, they're all part of the grieving process that Native Americans have, and also that we have. In fact, with Dia de los Muertos, I have my ofrendas set up of my late partner and of my dogs and of my brothers and of my dad who passed away this year. So later this week, I'm going to go and I'm going to tend to all of them. And you put the things that they liked in life. If you get a chance to go down to the Mesilla Plaza to look at the Dia de los Muertos, it's phenomenal. It's so well done. So this idea of the ancestors has always really intrigued me a lot, and I think it's because I had to look so hard to find out who my ancestors were. I had to do that through a number of DNA tests, and that got me to also think. There's a lot of scientists, a lot of psychologists, most famously Carl Jung, who was talking about. They're theorizing that what's passed down from our ancestors stays up in our cells. The way that we're going to have brown eyes, or the way that we're going to have brown hair, or a certain skin tone, that's all in our DNA sequence there. So there's some people who are thinking that in our mitochondria, which are like the batteries of our cell, that's where our emotions get passed down. That's where the experiences that your ancestors had gets passed down too. And there's also this thing called inherited trauma. I don't know if any of you have heard about that, but some of us have really tried to heal and tried to break patterns, maybe of things in the past, of maybe the ancestors that we didn't actually know, but that our propensity to maybe be depressed, our propensity to maybe be a certain way that is not useful. Well, there's a way to break that pattern, and you have to go back quite a far ways. There's this great book that I came across. It's called It Didn't Start With You by Mark Wolin, and it's been really instructive on this too. And so I was talking about the idea of walking on. So when my father passed away earlier, I think it was April of this year, I hadn't spoken to him in about 25 years. And so, of course, there was some, healing there that needed to happen. I knew it was too late to do it in this life, so I started to really find a way to spur his soul on. So there's a beautiful Lakota ceremony that I absolutely love, and this is how it goes. They take a lock of hair from the departed person, and they hold it over a piece of sweetgrass or smudge to purify it. Then they would wrap it in a piece of sacred buckskin, and the sacred pipe would also be smoked. And this buckskin bundle was called a soul bundle. Isn't that a great term, a soul bundle? It was kept in a very special place of the hut or the teepee. It was the property of the soul's keeper. It was usually a relative or somebody really close to them. And they would vow to live a harmonious life, usually up to 1 year, until that time was done. And they would keep that soul bundle, and they would keep pure, and they would pray, they would offer smoke, they would offer corn pollen, whatever it took, to Wakantanka, which is what the Lakota call the afterlife. So the cool thing was this bundle that had the soul was carried outside at the end of the year. And it was opened up and unwrapped kind of gently. And as soon as it reached the air, if the soul bundle, if the smoke went to if the ashes went to the right, then that person was successful and they were going to cross on, they were going to go on to Wakantanka. But if it went to the left, that means you had to do a lot more work. So I was thinking of my dad, and I was thinking, of what we went through as children with him. And I don't mean to speak bad about anybody, but I was thinking, okay, he's probably going to need some help in the afterlife. And so I was doing a lot of affirmations. I was doing a lot of prayer. And then I came across this ceremony, and I thought, that is so perfect. But it also meant that I had to be perfect the whole year. So I'm restarting that a couple of times. But whatever it takes. Jack Kornfield has said of the Lakota, he said, for the Lakota, the grief was something to be valued. It brought a person closer to God, for when a person has suffered a great loss and was grieving, they were considered most holy. Their prayers were believed to be especially powerful, and others would ask those grievers to pray on their behalf. There's a Japanese thing where they have professional mourners. Have you ever heard about this? These people are professional criers. So they would come to your loved one's funeral, and they would mourn openly and just grieve. And that was also said to help them along too, because the ancestors would look and go, well, this person must have been really loved. And so, I've decided I'm going to have a living wake. I don't know if you guys have ever heard about that. I mean, it's going to be great. You're all invited. I don't know when it'll be, but hopefully not for a long time. But I think the idea of a living wake is just great, because you get to have everyone there, and you get to say goodbye in the best possible way. What I found out about grief, particularly after some really difficult losses, and if any of you have experienced this, tell me also. When I was in the deep throes of grief, people would come out of nowhere. I mean, at a post office, at a grocery store, at a financial planning place that I went to. They just come and they tell you their grief story. Has anyone have that happen to you? I think grief is a certain frequency that we're broadcasting. Maybe it's where we are saying we're at that sacred point, and we can support your grief, or we can help carry your grief. Or maybe it's just that you have like a neon sign that says, I'm grieving too, and so we're just looking for company. I don't really know, but that was a really unique experiences, and other people that I've talked to have also had that experience. So I've been a volunteer with hospice patients for about 13 years. I play music for them during their last time, whether that be a few months. There are some people where I've played for, and they've passed away within hours. And so I've been present at a lot of those times, and I find it's a really sacred time. It's a really beautiful time. It's a very natural time. But I came across this book, this article in 2009. It was written by this woman named Bronnie Ware, W-A-R-E. And she wrote this article that I'd come across, and it said, Regrets of the Dying, the 5 regrets of the dying. She had worked for 8 years in palliative care. She had been a hospice person, and she had helped quite a few people pass over. And so these are the 5 things that she surmise that she learned from all of these people. And I think this is instructive mostly for us who are still living. Number one, people told her mostly, I wish I'd had the courage to live a true life to myself and not the life others expected of me. She said that's the most common regret of all, that when people realized that their life was almost over and they got to look back on it kind of clearly, that it was easy to see how they had not done certain things. Maybe they didn't live out certain dreams because they were afraid of what people would think about them. So that was the number one regret people had. I wish I had had the courage to live a life true to myself and not the life others expected of me. Number two, I found this pretty interesting. The number two regret that people had was they said, I wish I hadn't worked so hard. Amen. She said this especially came from every male patient that she had, not so many of the women just because of that generational difference there. But she said so many people wish that they had spent more time with their family, that they had spent more time doing what they wanted to do, like, hobbies. And they also wish that they had had more space in their life. And you can create more space in your life to become happier, to become open to the new opportunities. But that's a tough one, isn't it? Because we have to work. We have to work in order to get by, but just keep that in mind. I wish I hadn't worked so hard. Number three was, they said, I wish I'd had the courage to express my feelings. I wish I'd had the courage to express my feelings. I have a YouTube channel with a whole lot of views on there, and let me tell you, people have no trouble expressing their feelings. Of course, I don't see them face to face, and I don't actually know them, but we're in a time where it's easy just to vent without really thinking about it. But what they were talking about, of course, was to express their real feelings, just to call up a good friend or look at somebody who you've known a while and just say, I really appreciate you, and here's why. I want to take a chance to say, Bonnie, we appreciate you being Lily and Bonnie and the only practitioner, so thank you for that. It helps. It helps you grow. It's just like I have a rose bush it's in this last throes of blooming now, and so I went out there just the other day and stood with it for 10 minutes until my neighbor looked out. She said, "Randy, are you okay?" Shh, go away. I'm appreciating and expressing my feelings to my rose. And it was awesome. It's a beautiful rose. I got a great picture of it. It looks like it has a mustache. And so I'm just saying, the courage to express my feelings, that's what these people, one of the regrets that they had. The other one was, number 4 was, I wish I'd stayed in touch with my friends, right? I've been with so many people towards the end of their life in hospice. They often will start calling out the names of people, their relatives and their friends, and some of them will tell me, Sheila was here last night, and and who am I to say that somebody wasn't there? I have no idea of knowing what they actually see. But these people expressed to this writer, Bonnie Rare, that they'd wish that they'd really stayed in touch with their friends, because towards the end of their life, they started to reach out to all the people, and they realized they had either already died or they just couldn't get a hold of them anymore. So they wish they'd stayed in touch with their friends. I think I would add to that, just don't take advantage of the relationships that really nourish you and that really feed you. Number 5, this is a tough one, because it says they wish they had let themselves be happier. They wish they had let themselves be happier. I read this quote by Leonard Cohen about 15 years ago, and he said, 30 million people are on Prozac in America. He said, it's like there's something wrong in the landscape, in the spiritual landscape. So what makes you happy? I think you really have to find out what makes you happy. I wish I'd let myself be happier. Are we repressing some of that? Are we suppressing some of those feelings of just being happy? I have really, in recent years, trying to find out exactly what makes me happy, and certainly what makes me happy is being in nature. And being in nature, I find, is one of the things that just centers me. But make a list to yourself. What really makes me happy? And it can be a short list. It can be a long list. Just what really makes me happy. These things would make me happy. If I had this today, if I was doing this today, I would feel happier. So they told her that they'd felt like they had stayed stuck in a bunch of old patterns, negativity, and habits. They didn't forgive enough people. They didn't let enough go that had happened to them. Some of them said they had wished they had let go of their resentment or their anger at their mother or their boss or their ex-spouse. So just that. They wish they had let themselves be happier. When you're on your deathbed, really, what others think of you is a long way from your mind. And what a gift that is. Bonnie spoke some words from the Tibetan book of the living, right? Living and Dead, yeah. And so that's always been one of my absolute favorite things to read, the Tibetan Book of the Dead. There's a great passage from it, and this is what it says. It says, "At death we lose everything we thought was real. Unless we can let go of all the things we cherished in our life, we are terrified. If we cannot stop struggling to hold on to our old life, all our fear and yearning will drag us into yet another painful reality. In other words, do your work now, heal now, forgive now. Come back if that's how you believe things. Come back much lighter. Come back freer." I've been watching this book. It moves really fast. I've been watching this series called The Ghost Inside My Child. Have you ever seen that? It's stories that are collected from this book, but that's been made into a series. These are children who come back and say, "I was Mark, I was on an aircraft carrier, and I died in World War II." All the details, and these kids are 3 years old and 2 years old, and so it's very compelling when you think, wow, how do they know so much about who they never knew about and who they never were? How were they someone who spoke a different language? I love kind of thinking about that. But what I was saying about Miguel Ruiz, he has this great book called The Toltec Art of Life and Death. It's really a very heavy book, but it's also, it's a different way of looking at what happens to us. And this is what he said, and I think this will resonate with these 5 regrets that people had. In the book, he writes, "Everyone looks for someone to love them, even when they hate themselves. They wait for lightning to strike, for the phone to ring, for a knight to arrive in shining armor. When people are disappointed in love, they think they are unlovable. They feel deprived, always hungry. This hunger makes them desperate for any offer of love and attention and susceptible to all forms of mistreatment." Pretty heavy stuff. Live a life that you're not going to regret and find out what that is. Find out what's going to make you happy. It's not that you want to live forever. Nobody wants to live forever. I love when they come out with these new studies. We can now extend human life. Why? We're doing okay, We're doing okay now. The average lifespan used to be 39, and that was considered the old man and the old woman. Now it's higher, like 79 or something. I don't know. I haven't checked the latest statistics, but Ernest Holmes says this, and I'm going to end with this. He says, "We must seek the source of life if we would live, and no longer see as through a glass darkly. We shall be gently led from our canyons of disillusionment into the fertile valleys of peace through which flows the river of life. Being individuals, the choice is ours. Being divine, seek freedom. Being immortal, we shall find it." And so it is. Thank you.